Experiments and research play an important part in the field of psychology. In this lesson, we will discuss the research methods where you are expected to justify why psychology is a science, enumerate and explain the 5 steps of scientific method, examine the purpose and nature of the different types of psychological research, and discuss the significance of ethical research. What makes psychology a science? It is the use of the scientific method that makes psychology a science. Most of the studies psychologists publish in research journals follow the scientific method, which is summarized in these 5 steps. First, observing phenomenon. The first step in conducting scientific inquiry involves observing some phenomenon in the world. The phenomena that the scientists study are called variables, anything that can change. One example of a variable is happiness. Some people are happier than the others. What might account for the difference? Considering the probable answer to this question, scientists often develop a theory. A theory is a broad idea or set of closely related ideas that attempts to explain observation. An important characteristic of scientific theory is that it must be falsifiable, meaning that even a scientist who believes that a theory is true must be able to generate ideas about research that would prove the theory wrong and test those ideas. Second, formulating hypotheses and predictions. A hypothesis is a testable prediction that derives logically from theory. For example, a researcher who believes that social belonging is the most important aspect of human functioning might predict that people who belong to social groups will be happier than others, or might hypothesize that individuals who are excluded of the social group will be more aggressive. Third, testing through empirical research. To test hypotheses, the researchers collect and analyze data. Fourth, drawing conclusions. The scientists then draw conclusions from the research based on the results of the data analysis. If the results of the study or a series of studies support predictions, then a theory may gain credibility. However, a theory is always open to revision. Fifth, evaluating conclusions. The final step in the scientific method, evaluating conclusions, is one that never ends. Researchers submit their work for publications and it undergoes rigorous review. Afterward, the published studies are there for all to see, read, and evaluate continually. There are different types of psychological research. Let's go through each type. First, naturalistic observations are research studies that are conducted in the environment in which the behavior typically occurs. Case study is an in-depth observation of one participant. Survey is a straightforward way to measure psychological variables. Survey presents a standard set of questions or items to obtain people's self-reported attitudes or beliefs about a particular topic. Correlational studies test the relationship between or more variables. Example, television watching and violent behavior or depression and gender. Longitudinal design involves observing and measuring the same variables periodically over time. Experimental method determines whether a causal relationship exists between variables. An experiment is a carefully regulated procedure in which the researcher manipulates one or more variables that are believed to influence some other variable. Experiments have two types of variables, independent and dependent. An independent variable is a manipulated experimental factor. It is the variable that the experimenter changes to see what its effects are. It is the potential cause. A dependent variable is the outcome, the factor that can change in an experiment in response to changes in the independent variable. Experiments involve experimental and control groups. An experimental group consists of the participants in an experiment who receive the treatment that is of interest to the researcher. The control group is as much like the experimental group as possible and is treated in every way like the experimental group, except for a manipulated factor, the independent variable. In some experiments, the control group receives a placebo or inactive substance such as a sugar pill rather than being given nothing. The placebo effect occurs when participants show changes simply because they believe or expect a treatment to have certain effects. Within participant designs ensure that a control group and an experimental group are as similar as possible. Quasi-experimental design is somewhat similar to experimental research, but a key difference is that quasi-experimental design does not include random assignment to participants to condition, because such assignment is either impossible or unethical. Research samples. When psychologists conduct a study, they usually want to be able to draw conclusions that will apply to a larger group of people than the participants they actually study. The entire group of people about which the investigator wants to draw conclusions is the population. The subset of the population chosen by the investigator for a study is the sample. However, to mirror the population as closely as possible, the researcher uses a random sample, a sample that gives every member of the population an equal chance of being selected. Conducting ethical research. Ethics is an important consideration for all science. At the base of all ethical guidelines is the notion that a person participating in psychological research should be no worse off coming out of the study than he or she was on the way in. The American Psychological Association, or APA, has developed ethical guidelines for its members. APA's guidelines address 4 important issues. First, informed consent. All participants must know what their participation will involve and what risks might develop. Second, confidentiality. Researchers are responsible for keeping all the data they gather on individuals completely confidential and, when possible, completely anonymous. Third, debriefing. When preliminary information about the study is likely to affect the results, participants can at least be debriefed after the completion of the study by informing them the purpose and the methods used. Fourth, deception. This can range from deception by omission to active deception. Deception by omission means not telling participants what the study is really about. An active deception means misleading participants about what is going on in the study.